the recording. Okay, welcome everybody to the Nexia International COVID-19 versus Business Survival webinar. Today, in particular around how to restructure, innovate. But the question is obviously for many businesses how to do that. We will look a lot today about what's actually going on with businesses in the different regions of Asia, of Europe, and also of the US. The regions have been differently hit, and while now quite a lot of business are still sort of surviving due to furloughs and other government incentives, things certainly become more visible as the COVID situation, unfortunately, is still quite demanding, and we are now facing sort of second wave, or probably, hopefully not, but probably continuous wave till a vaccine is found. In particular, we have a couple of sectors which are logically the hardest hit, like leisure and tourism, retail, manufacturing, and real estate. And our experts today will give you an insight on all this. Just to probably introduce them very briefly, let's start Far East, following a little bit the COVID trip, let's say. Yee Hong Chan, you are based in Singapore. You have you're director of TRI, Turnaround, Restructuring and Insolvency in Singapore. Would you mind to give us probably 2-3 sentences about your background and exposure to the insolvency activities, so that the attendees may just get an insight of your expertise, please? Yee Hong, you might be muted, I guess.
My apologies, my apologies.
It's fine.
Well, I was saying, yes, thanks, Oliver, for the kind introduction. Well, I'm a director in the firm. I lead the insolvency and restructuring practice in Singapore. I've been for the past 2 decades of insolvency restructuring practice. This pandemic that we're facing now is certainly very unprecedented. We have not seen this before. And we are working very closely now with our clients to really deal with issues arising from the pandemic. And yes, I think this is a good opportunity for us to share notes, compare notes, and see how we can help each other moving forward, particularly to deal with the second wave, and hopefully the vaccine is found before we need to do more. So much for that.
Thank you very much, Yee Hong. I'm certainly curious to see how business are doing currently, given that COVID started sort of in Asia. Carsten, you are in Germany, you're with Eben and Stolz. What's your background in the restructuring area, please?
Hi, Oliver. Hi, everybody out there. Yeah, my background originally is being an engineer by education, but somehow I ended up in the restructuring business some 20 years ago. And the last decade of this being partner was Eben and Stolz. And as such, I've been involved in many turnaround situations, most of them being out of court restructuring things, and focused on what we call Mittelstand in Germany. So the many family-owned businesses and thereof companies which have a turnaround of like bigger than 100 million euro mainly. Every now and then I am also engaged as a CRO or interim head of finance, etc. And the most exciting things I've had the chance to be part of was the restructuring of 2 billion, 4,000 staff companies, one of them being the biggest dairy in Germany, and then one a big producer and vendor of fruit and vegetables and business and plant. And yeah, as Yee Hong, as you already said, what we are encountering right now is unprecedented. And so, as everybody else, as you out there, we have to be agile, we have to adjust and learn and move on from this, from today to the, well, let's say next normal, until we reach maybe someday a new normal.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, Carsten, you alluded to it. I think innovation is the key here, although that's not always easy in all businesses. Well, let's go further west. Kevin, you are based in the US, in New York. I think for you, it's not only the current COVID crisis, but probably an additional uncertainty is whatever the outcome of the elections are, that might also have a big impact either way for probably some businesses. So that's even seems to be a little bit more challenging. What's your background in the area?
Sure, thank you, and good morning to my colleagues here in the U.S., and good afternoon to my colleagues in Europe, and finally, good evening to those in Asia, and thank you for joining us today. So as Oliver said, I'm just outside of New York City. I've been doing restructuring work since the late 1990s, so this will be kind of my third downturn that we're going through right now, and we'll be going through, for the next couple of years. Much more impactful than the Great Recession, that hit us back in 2008 and 2009. Our group does a lot of both in-court and out-of-court restructuring, pretty much industry agnostic, whatever, industries are being hit the hardest right now. Obviously, a lot of the hospitality, which we'll talk about later on. But again, it's, you couple that with, there's a rumor going around that we have an election coming up in November. So that certainly is adding to the excitement as far as, the politics that come into play with everything going on with COVID and potential, antidotes for it. It's everything is, every day you turn on the news and there's so many variables in the mix. And then you couple that with the businesses being impacted, by COVID-19, it really is an unprecedented circumstance that we're dealing with. So glad to be part of this discussion today. And I would certainly encourage, as you think of the questions as they come in, we'd be happy to answer them. And I think what we're going to see over the coming years is actually more cross-border and international insolvency situations involving companies around the world. So even more so than we've seen in the past. So thank you.
Okay, great, Kevin. So, well, as you know a little bit who the speakers are, we were thinking we're a little bit going into a poll and figuring out actually what your background is from an industry perspective, and 2-3 other questions just to get the tone. Laura, yeah, okay, here we are. So first question is a little bit to get a grip on what kind of attendees we have today, from what sector they're in. Feel free to start voting now on screen. You see what sector is your business in. Just go ahead and vote, please. Hope it has come up. I guess so. I can see it at least. No voting? Oh, no. Yes, somebody starts 2, 3. Now it gets in. Oh, I started. You may start to make me worry. I hope, I trust you know which sector you are in. Manufacturing. There are obviously a couple of others. Yes, we focused here a lot on the main or the areas we thought we're covering today. Nobody from real estate or retail. That's surprising. Okay, we get decent number in now. Speeds up. Okay, some retail people. That's great. Surprisingly, oh yes, real estate as well. Great. I mean, that might have actually quite a big impact on many businesses if they're on their own property. Not too much on tourism and leisure. Okay, fine. We have 3 more questions to go, and they are a little bit more in direction of well, how your firms are doing and so on. So we will stop the first question now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's go to the next one. So this is more get a feel of how you think we had the voting on everything. Okay, now I get it. So how are your companies prepared for the second wave or the ongoing wave? Okay, not at all was 1, and quite well prepared. Focus seems to be on number 7, so rather better than bad. So that's good to see. I mean, everybody has been challenged, obviously. What we have on 3, for how many months do you think your firm has to resist until things will improve better? Okay, for more than 10 months. That's very interesting. So we really need to see what we can get on the feedback on this one. Is that something you would have expected? I don't know, Carsten, Yee Hong, or Kevin? More than 10 months is, wow, that's really a challenge. Then what do you have to do to prepare? What have been done? Yeah, cash flow financing. I think that's quite know, staff, labor. Yeah, innovation, we had that. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, I guess we can end the polling now and move on to the presentations. Thank you for your results, and let's move on. Okay, what's the regional situation currently, and some insolvency statistics, understand the overall situation. I hand over to Carsten, who will give you an insight on his views in Europe. Carsten, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. And yeah, talking about Europe, we have to be aware that Europe is quite diverse. A lot of countries and with a lot of different approaches also to handle COVID. And wouldn't go through the numbers in detail, but if I still remember how I get into contact first with COVID. It was the pictures we saw from Italy, which was really a daunting example, and it felt like Dante's Inferno. And to be honest, I think this led to some major adaptations in Germany, and also in many other countries in Europe. And what we see that we have really a very diverse way how COVID hit the countries. We have, like, for example, it's not on the chart, Greece was record low numbers with a very effective COVID management. We had this different approach Sweden took with much higher infection numbers until recently. But just today, this morning in the newspaper, I read that their positive test ratio is the lowest in Europe at the moment, so might pay off what they did. So and then also looking to Belgium, it's not really on the spot, but with almost 100 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants, which is really a high number. So well, it's been hit hard, and the ways of shutdown, how shutdown was managed, is also very different. Yeah, and what is different also is the way the governments reacted, the way the power of financial bazookas they did, and what is very astonishing is from a European perspective that the EU had the first stimulus package which included communitizing debts, which, especially from a German perspective, I am German as introduced, was for Germany, we didn't want to get the fingers on it. And personally, I think it was a wise decision to do so. It's the right step for getting a real EU, and I think without any real alternative at the very moment. And so actually, I'm quite positive that we all managed to go through the pandemic well, as good as possible. Laura, could you please switch to the next page? Or Oliver? Yeah, okay. So and what we see, given the size of the stimulus packages, that we all read numbers we never thought would be possible. If you would have asked us a month or two before, is that the economies seem to develop V-shaped. Yeah, I put some figures on the chart, and what you see is that it's always the GDP forecasts always compared to the last quarter, and then it was all over Europe. First, of course, it started in Q1 as March being the first month of COVID. Italy was a bit earlier, so hit harder. Also in Q1 was -5%. And then in the second quarter, we see double-digit downturn, reaching up to 20% in the UK max. And then hopefully the Q3 outlook is quite positive across Europe, although we think that reaching the pre-pandemic niveau will last until 2020. But nevertheless, the seems to look V-shaped. And yeah, of course, the number of unemployed were rising, and I think there are some figures behind the figures, as we have this short-time work compensation and allowance issues, which, to my opinion, deter the statistics, but we'll see what's going on. Next page, please. This V-shaped thing is also strengthened if you look to some other indices I put on that chart. Looking at the purchasing managers indexes, whether you look in the Eurozone or look to Germany, you could see it's a V shape, and knock on wood, and will stay like that. What you see on the lower part of the chart, that also if you ask to the private household, so the consumer, so you and me or you and us, we see it's also a swing, it's also V-shaped, but the niveau is still a little bit lower. So this we have to take into account if we're talking about retail and other sectors later on in that issue. Next page, please. And when looking at this also from an insolvency perspective, we have to have in mind that in a lot of countries there have been amendments of insolvency regulations, also very diverse from country to country in Europe. For example, in Germany, the government suspended the filings for insolvency due to indebtedness and due to illiquidity in the first step until end of September. And just 2 weeks ago, they prolonged the suspension due to over-indebtedness, but said no to suspension due to illiquidity, which personally myself, but almost every other people you talk to find very reasonable, as otherwise we'd have a lot of zombie enterprises, which would be good for the economy. The actual numbers of insolvency are quite low. Just yesterday they got the August figures. It's 26% in Germany below last year, and we think it's because that the vast majority of the professional companies seem to be stabilized. They have some consultants. We are consulting some. The colleagues are consulting others. Yeah, and so we think that the rise of insolvency numbers will mainly be for small companies and private persons. And then it's very interesting what we'll see in 2021, because we have at least 2 developments we should be aware of. One is from the credit insurance side. Euler Hermes seems to fire things up because they announced not to prolong insurances for distressed entities, as there is a stimulus package also, or protection umbrella also for that in Germany. And what everybody's looking for is how the EU directive on preventive restructuring framework will be transposed into national laws. This will take place 21. And what we expect in many countries who don't have this off-court prepacks, as we have in the UK already, but they are not very common in other parts of Europe, that these off-court prepacks will most likely lead to the trend that even debts which would be collected during the Corona packages will be seen with a lot of haircuts, because it's then easy to get rid of them. So that's got to be very interesting. And so everybody here is waiting for those things to come, but we'll see. So that should be it for a small overview about Europe. Sorry for rushing through, but now I'm happy to hand over to Yee Hong and to news from Asia.
Thank you, Carsten. It's quite interesting. I'm a little bit relieved to see that the bigger, mid-sized, bigger companies seem to be stabilized, but I think a great number of entities, enterprises are rather in the smaller business areas. So that's certainly an interesting one. Okay. Yee Hong, what's the situation in Asia, please?
Well, I read with interest, Carsten, the government is so kind as to suspend filing of bankruptcy applications until end of the year. Our experience in Asia, I'm going to cover three countries, Singapore, China, and Indonesia. So for my home country, Singapore, well, we have legislation passed in April this year, which as a temporary measure, they're raising the hurdle for bankruptcy filing to different threshold from a 15%, or sorry, 15,000 to 100,000, and they prolonged the statutory notice from 21 days to 6 months, all in a bid to slow down the anticipated spike in bankruptcies caused by the pandemic. So besides, the Singapore government has also provided financial support. The government rolled out stimulus packages amounting to some US 70.4 billion to save jobs, help businesses survive and to reinvent, and also to help households to tide over the economic hardship. Well, as a result, the winding up filings for the period from April to June dropped by 55% compared to the same period last year. Winding up orders were down by about 49%. Personal bankruptcies also fell by about 36% for the first 7 months of the year. Now, what's interesting to watch is whether the government will continue to extend the moratorium, inverted commas, for filing of bankruptcy applications. If the moratorium is not extended in October, then we may see a reverse in the trend and can expect more bankruptcy filings to go up. Oliver, next slide, please.
What would you expect here, Wilbert? What would you expect the moratorium to go through, or will be extended or not? Yee Hong, what's your feel?
Well, what I hear from bankers and some business on the ground, they think, and I think it might be extended because the government has, over the span of last half a year, have been supplementing the budget by effectively pumping more money into the industry just to save all these collapses. So it may well look like an extension might be possible, but I think the government has also acknowledged that this QE, if you like, cannot continue indefinitely, and those that should go should go. So let's see, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but let's watch. It's just next month.
Okay. What about China, Indonesia now?
China has its fair share of bankruptcies. You see that bankruptcy has gone up by about 80%, from 19,000 to about 35,000 cases for the first 7 months of the year. And to rein in the number of bankruptcies, the Chinese courts are requested to encourage insolvent companies to restructure or to settle with their creditors before going to liquidation. But the courts need to guide parties in negotiations, proposing installment plans, or even to the extent of extending the time for the debtor to discharge the liabilities. The courts must also review the ability of the debtor to continue to operate and to assess the viability of the industry in which the debtor operates. If all this failed, then and only then a company may be declared bankrupt. Down in Indonesia, the restructuring cases have also gone up by over 50% in the first half of the year compared to last. And bankruptcy cases fell by about 38% because of more restructuring going on. Companies are encouraged to explore restructuring over liquidation, as liquidation would inevitably lead to massive unemployment. Let's see. That's it. I've come to the end of my first part. Over to Kevin.
Great. Thank you very much. Very informative. Just, again, perspective in the US, from a COVID perspective, it really hit in the New York Northeast earlier on in the year in March and April and May, which were very, very bad months. Since then, it's been spreading, more across the country and hitting, states down south and more on the West Coast. And just, I know Karsten had some statistics up earlier, but in the U.S., the number of cases is about 6.5 million and almost 200,000 deaths to date. So pretty significant, but I think it's also very relevant as to how it has impacted various states and therefore their individual economies, at different points in time. When you look at a state like California, which is their economy is enormous and larger than many countries around the world, and they've had lockdowns, and so I think the effects that we're going to see from a restructuring standpoint are going to be directly related to the economies of different states and the businesses and industries within those states. Just some perspective, this year through June 30th, there are more than 3,600 Chapter 11 filings, which is a 26% increase from the same period last year. Initially the thought was that maybe this was mostly small businesses driving this figure, especially given that Subchapter 5, which I'll touch on in a second, just came into existence in February of this year. But in fact, many of the businesses, it's affecting all sizes that are being affected by COVID. And in fact, filings by companies with assets of more than $1 billion is over 18% higher than that for the same period in 2009 during the Great Recession. So it's the small companies as well as the large ones that are being affected. And just a brief background on the Subchapter 5, because I think it's important and very relevant here. It's a new provision that came into law in 2019, but came into effect in early 2020, just not by design, but right before COVID really started hitting. And this is Subchapter 5 is intended for small businesses. And right now it's for businesses that have less than 7.5 million in third-party liabilities and obligations. And it was intended to be a quicker, cheaper, more streamlined process than a full-blown Chapter 11. And again, it's geared towards small companies, which you can imagine right now with everything that's going on with COVID, there's more and more of these Subchapter 5s that are being filed, and I think will continue into 2021. And we'll touch on retail in a little bit, but understandably 2020 is on track to have the highest number of retail bankruptcies in a decade. Now, obviously retail was already being affected and in trouble before the pandemic hit. This has just exacerbated and accelerated, many more closings than would have occurred otherwise. Perhaps the most impacted industry, obviously retail. 43 key players filed for bankruptcy through the beginning of August. And I just read this week that 80,000 small businesses closed in the second quarter of 2020 and will not reopen. Unlike the Great Recession, more industries will be impacted by the effects of COVID-19. Based on what we're seeing so far in 2020, it's just the tip of the iceberg. 2021 should be pretty active restructuring marketplace. Right now, again, we're seeing, on the retail side, very large companies, and then we have a lot of very small companies. It's really the middle market that I think is going to really surge as far as restructurings in 2021. Our restructuring practice has been receiving inquiries from many of our clients, many in the hospitality sector, obviously a lot of restaurant clients. Again, that's state by state here in the U.S. as to how restaurants are being affected, but it's obviously a huge piece of the economy. As we continue to see clients and prospects concerned with their financial condition, despite the $2 trillion of federal relief that was deployed, not all of that was as effective. There were different buckets of that $2 trillion that was rolled out by the U.S. government, and some was more helpful than others. But again, as the dust settles, I think what we're starting to see, and Yee Hong, you referenced, what you're hearing from the lenders. I think we're seeing the same thing and hearing the same thing in the U.S., which is the banks are going to be forced to weed out bad credits. There's a lot of companies that were hanging on pre-pandemic that are likely not going to survive. And again, that's going to be more in the middle market. And I think that's really what's going to take off we're coming up on, September being the last month in the third quarter, as companies are confronted with asset values relative to the market. And so I think you're going to see a lot of write-downs of assets, not only at the end of the third quarter, but again at the end of the year, which will obviously impact a lot of their credit situation. So again, the next 4 months, are going to be very critical, and certainly going into 2021. Our own client base at Cohen-Resnick, they received about $2 billion in stimulus money. So now we're going through the process of helping them. Part of that can be forgiven, depending on the industry that you're in and how you use the money. Certainly, it was not a long-term fix. It's very short-term, and that was what it was intended, because none of us knew when this first hit, how long this was going to go on. But I think that what has occurred, starting in March, certainly in the Northeast, and now, has rolled out throughout the country. I think the long-term effects of how businesses are going to be impacted is still yet to be seen. But it's not going to be something that is going to get cured, between now and the end of the year. And it's just a matter of, are we talking through 2021 and into 2022? One of the other variables, as was mentioned earlier, in the whole mix right now is that we have an election coming up in November. So that is certainly impacting what's going on in our federal government right now as far as additional stimulus packages. But again, all of these factors are certainly pointing for people in our profession that we're going to be very busy. And again, as I stated earlier, I think there's going to be more cross-border, international companies that are going to be impacted, and will certainly keep many of us very busy for the foreseeable future. So back to you, Oliver.
Thanks for the thanks for that, Kevin, Yee Hong, Carsten. Certainly interesting, and I hope it's not going to be that bad. But I think quite a lot of things following what you just said. Some seems to be quite hidden or sort of artificial. So there's going to be something going on soon. Well, I think an important point for everybody would obviously be to understand, well, what can be done to survive the second or probably continuous wave, and how to keep your businesses afloat for long term. In the poll just in the beginning, is quite a lot of you seem to be pretty prepared for several months. So that's good to see and hear. However, probably or likely there are going to be some interesting points on this one. Let's start with Yee Hong. What are your recommendations to combat the second wave?
We are seeing countries in Asia reporting second wave of infection. China, for example, is one of them and is tackling the second infection, although this time it's of a smaller number. And based on lessons that we've learned from the first wave, we would recommend that business owners should continue to do the following to combat the second wave, so as to stay afloat in the long term. One, prevent the spread of the virus by maintaining good physical and mental health. We must continue to ensure our people practice safe distancing and wear masks whenever we are out and about. So far, our experience in Asia has been that the virus can be contained when people maintain safe distancing and wear masks. And to ensure good mental health, we would encourage our people to exercise regularly and to participate in virtual events such as yoga and cooking classes, something to do other than working from home. And next is we haven't seen the full effects of the pandemic haven't been felt. Despite government stimulus packages to ease the financial hardship, business owners must continue to be vigilant and to keep their cash flow positive, and should build reserves to cushion any possible further shocks that evolve from the pandemic. And the third recommendation would be the business owners should continue to push on in the transformation of the business models to face challenges and to meet the needs of an embattled economy by the virus. In this respect, we are seeing cinemas, for example, converting their premises to provide power naps to working employees. Nightclubs changing themselves to dining spots and dance studios. And even retail space and hospitality businesses are converting part of their premises to office use. and private car operator Grab is diversifying into food delivery, for example, just to tweak their business models to stay relevant. So until the virus is brought under control, business owners would do well by adapting to changes and identifying trends in consumer demand and meeting them. I think that would be the recommendations we would have to business owners to meet the second and maybe even the third, hopefully not.
Interesting cultural aspects here, Yee Hong, because I would have not had the idea to go for a power nap into the cinema, I admit, but certainly a creative idea.
Innovative,
good.
we find it.
Yeah, certainly. Good. Kevin, what would you recommend to face the second wave? And I encourage, if you have questions about recommendations, then please drop in a note in the chat box so our speakers can answer and take position before we then later on move to the more sector-focused view. But Kevin, what would you recommend?
Sure. Thank you. And again, obviously, nobody could have anticipated the full extent of the pandemic, the first time that it hit earlier this year. But it's really a matter of what have businesses learned as a result of that. And obviously, nobody knows, what's coming at this point. Everybody's waiting to see, how the second wave hits and what the repercussions are. But I think, sticking to some of the mainstays that we've talked about in the past, which is, be conservative with cash. Companies are concerned with both short-term and long-term viability of their businesses. The questions that we asked at the beginning of the webinar, I think, were very telling as to how long companies can exist. But certainly surviving in the short term is the first step in order to then figure out what the next steps are to be able to survive longer term. Obviously conserving cash, be creative, unlocking liquidity from your balance sheet. Here in the U.S., we're anticipating that you're going to see a lot of businesses, both private sector as well as public sector, because the governments, the state governments and local governments are being impacted because of the fall off in revenue and tax dollars. So you're going to see, companies and as well as the public sector looking for ways to monetize assets, real estate, to be able to be in a position where if they own office buildings, can they sell them and then lease it back so that they're able to unlock some liquidity? That's going to be a big uptick. And also being able to operate during the pandemic. We've all learned and adapted and figured out ways that we can continue to service clients and our customers. It's really a matter of just being creative and making sure that you're investing in the right places, right money in IT and so forth to be able to continue your work operations. Our firm certainly has invested a lot in IT and infrastructure. Innovative solutions continue to drive alternative ways of doing business. We've become accustomed to remote training, virtual hiring, onboarding, video interaction with our clients and key business drivers. And companies are reinventing themselves to match their services and expertise with current market demands. Just as an example, there's a company, I think they're probably worldwide, but ServPro, which typically deals with businesses that have been impacted by natural disasters, floods, hurricanes. They have now adapted themselves to service businesses as far as cleaning and making sure that there's, a store has a sign in the front window that says our store has been certified, clean from a COVID standpoint, which is a great way to think about taking the services and your expertise and adapting it to the unfortunate circumstances that surround all of us. Businesses need to continue to analyze their supply chain and make sure they are not at risk if one of their large suppliers or customers is forced to close their doors. Make sure you have options in place. Do your diligence to understand what steps your suppliers have taken also to assure delivery of goods and services to your business. And to our fellow Nexia colleagues, assisting your clients with this type of diligence can be a new revenue source. It's both financial and operational due diligence to make sure that your clients' current or future business partners can sufficiently meet their needs. Companies also need to take advantage of current opportunities instead of just acquiescing to the pandemic. They should read through their contracts. Insurance coverage is key. That's been a lot of questions we've been fielding from clients. Force majeure clauses, which have to do with whether or not the business can actually perform under a contract. And we have been along with our clients, enlisting the help of legal counsel, to really understand and explore what the alternatives might be. And finally, businesses need to analyze the weak points and key risks of the business to find out how to diversify those risks away and ultimately mitigate their exposure to the ripple effect of the pandemic. Next slide, please. You had a question, Oliver?
Well, it was a little bit about, it reads pretty easy, diversify and so on. Is there any, let's say, magic thing to do to be creative, find innovative ways of doing? I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is there anything which encourages good ideas to come up? Because in some cases, I guess, if it's only on the shoulders of the business owner, it's probably not that easy to think out of the box something completely different.
Well, it's a matter of communicating, and we've been promoting this, all along, which is to understand your customers and clients and what are their needs, and how is it that you can provide for those needs. It's stepping back and not only looking at what you've done in the past, but rather as companies have now, or in the face of the pandemic, like I said, on the diligence side, where companies can say, we need help in assessing our supply chain. Can somebody come in and help us explore alternatives? Who do we turn to if, in fact, we had a big supplier in Asia or Europe that all of a sudden is in trouble? Who do we have as a backup? So I think that it's really just kind of throwing your old playbook out the window and really looking for alternatives. And again, I think you're seeing companies that are going to survive are the ones that are adapting and figuring out different avenues and pursuits going forward, as opposed to just what have they done in the past. So I think that is, the communication piece is really, really critical. And that's where you're going to get the intel that you need to be able to adapt.
Okay, great.
So I know we're running short on time. So
no, it's fine. No worries. Okay, so you had adaptation and what was overlooked? Yeah, I guess in the situations quite often difficult, or you quite quickly overlook some aspects.
Absolutely, and I think again, communication is going to be critical, both with your suppliers and your customers. You got to all work together to make it through this. That is the really critical piece. There's a question I see about business interruption insurance claims. It's a great question, and I can only speak to what's going on in the US, but there's a lot of litigation as it relates to insurance policies and what was excluded or not excluded. It's very specific to the policies. And there have been some rulings by courts that are favorable to the insured, to the businesses, and there have been rulings that have been more favorable to the insurance companies. But there is no kind of general rule. It's really understanding and getting the right professionals involved to look at the provisions of your insurance policy and make sure that, again, you really understand it, and is there something to pursue? The other thing you're seeing is companies are renewing their insurance policies. Obviously, the insurance companies are making sure that there is better language that makes it clear of what is not covered as it relates to pandemics, like we're seeing here. So it's not only existing policies, but what are you doing as far as renewing your policies?
Okay, good. Let's move on. Let's focus a little bit more on specific sectors. Obviously, quite logic, tourism, leisure, retail, real estate, manufacturing. We had also from, I think, participants from all of these sector. Let's look into a little bit more into this, and probably you can also highlight what you would recommend specifically for those guys. Carsten, what do you think about the retail aspect?
Yeah, well, retail is sorry, really has been hit hard, and what we see is that the pandemic serves as fueling up the process which was already ongoing. So from the old type stationary shops into e-commerce, and looking at the chart I brought with you, is you will find some figures from Germany, but sorry, I think if you're looking to other European countries, there won't be much different, of course, in those countries where the lockdown was harder, longer, and is maybe a little bit more strict right now. Still, numbers will be even worse. But what we see is that we had a really deep drop down in the first 2 months of the pandemic. Was in Germany, April being the worst months for a very, very long time. Looking especially at the non-food retail, food in the beginning was well above the last year, and what we see is that e-commerce really rose up and then sort of exploded with plus 30% end of June compared to 2019, and with this trend going on still. And then if we look into the subsegments, of course, food is well quite okay. Most of them were still open during the curfew, and of course everybody of us had to buy food and stuff, not only toilet paper and other things, but if we look to those who have been seriously hit, then like books, furnitures, and toys and all that stuff, it was hard, and even worse it was in all those fashion type of things, whether it's clothing, whether it's shoes, of course also jewelry, watches, etc. And at the beginning still it was the flowers, so was dropping down significantly. But what we also see on the counter side is that people spend a lot of time in their gardens, and so after the first weeks where everybody didn't know what to do, we've seen a number of companies in that sort of, let's say, outdoor type of business, having record high figures, turnover figures. But and still, and also some figures from Germany. If you look into the main shopping streets, in the lockdown, there was almost nothing. The numbers dropped minus 96 to at least minus 89%. Yeah, nobody was on the streets. Nobody went shopping. During the loosened lockdown, things got better, but still was like minus 50, minus 60%. And right now, we in the post-lockdown area, we have still on average like 15% minus, sometimes also 30, really depending on the specific area you are in. And we made a survey amongst, as Edmar Stolz, amongst retail shops, and in order to find out what they are thinking about, how to handle the crisis, how to adapt to the new situation. And the most significant things was they say, okay, we need an intelligent plan for ramping up the business again, and stay flexible. This is easier said than done, as many other things also, because it means, like for a sports shop, for example, talking with the big industry players like Nike or Adidas, how to ship the new gears, the new equipment, and to be flexible, also not only on the logistics side, but also on the commercial side. Yeah, and of course, on the other hand, they also needed to find a way to get control of the cost basis, which in Germany, due to the short-time work allowances, is quite easy to handle. We find similar tools in other European countries, but still it's a way to go. Alliances is number two, is also a very, very interesting thing, because as we have a sort of COVID Darwinism right now going on, for the better of companies, there will be a chance to gain market share, to go into alliances, to take over other businesses, which we are looking for. And one of our clients is will have a press release, hopefully coming out next week, where they announce what they've done, which is very, very interesting. So we see there's a lot of chances also, and we see that some companies also use the stimulus money in order to move on strategically. Yeah, the basic thing, which is mid to long term, is of course new concepts. What is the assortment? What is the format for the shops? In Germany, we had the insolvency of the biggest and say last remaining department store, Galeria Kaufhof. Yeah, they're shutting down like something 30% of their outlets, with also a lot of effects on the real estate side. Yeah, and so there's a lot of things going on, and almost everybody is searching for the new concept, the new format, the blending, cross-channel, internet business, stationary business, and that's really an issue, and it's got to be an issue for the next years, with or without COVID. I think COVID only has accelerated things, but no changes which are only due to COVID. Last but not least, this thing which we see in almost every sector. Yeah, get a hold on your supply chain, optimize it where possible, and to make sure that you get your supplies. Yeah, talk to your suppliers, and not only on a short-term basis, but also strategically. And this also, from our experience, will foster the trend we saw also before COVID. So moving to newer or markets, supply markets in Asia, like from China to Vietnam to now they're ending up not only in Asia but start to produce clothes in Africa, for example. So if you have a look on that, I will just add the last point seen on that page. Thanks for turning around, Oliver. And I always touch on this topic, and we will hear some on the real estate sector from Kevin Clancy further on. This retail insolvencies really trigger the real estate thing, and right now we have a really vivid discussion going on in Germany, what effect this is going to have on the development of city centers, as the stores won't be the same after COVID. Yeah, and so this effect is going to be really big. We all see and feel the trend, but how big it is, how fast it will come, and how we use the room which is not used by retail in the near future. This has got to be very interesting, and I'm persuaded that this will change also a lot of how we live, moving back to the cities, and how we work. But well, that's going to affect all of us.
Well,
yeah.
Interestingly, to add to that one, probably it's not only the retail-related real estate, but it's also the office-related real estate. Many discuss should we reduce numbers of our staff coming in every day, etc., etc.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Just talking for our own company, Ebner Stolz, we are, knock on wood, we are growing double digits over the last couple of years. And of course, before the pandemic, we were looking for newer, bigger offices, more space for staff. But what we learned during COVID is that remote work works really well. And of course, yeah, I think this will lead that we at least maybe not stop, but put a foot on the brake regarding our own office space.
Okay, probably a little key. What are the key focus points here? Machinery, plant engineering.
Yeah, I think
you're civil engineer, so that's a little bit.
Some figures. We have an order decline of like 15-20% in the first half of the year compared to last year. we think that we are currently running a study together with the main industry players in Germany. What we think is that the lowest point is already reached, and we're going to see an improvement until year end. And we were looking quite confident for 21, but as already said in some other things, it will take until 22 until we reach earliest to reach the level what we've seen last year. And of course, the short-term measures are the same as in almost every other segment. So nothing special, I'd say. Also that trends we've already seen before COVID will get more and more important, whether it is digitization, whether it is looking remotely on the machinery, etc. So, yeah. So, well,
Great.
Speeding up trends.
Great, thanks. Yee Hong, what about tourism and leisure in Asia? I mean, a lot of people are not traveling anymore, and that hits, I think, quite heavily quite a lot of economies around the globe. But what about Asia? Singapore? Might be muted, are you? Less international visitors in Singapore?
Yeah.
Go
Sorry
ahead, no
about that.
problem. That's fine.
So
less visitors.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Suddenly the streets were empty. You feel that you're in a town uninhabited, you know. So when COVID came, we felt the heat of falling international tourist arrivals in Q1. And it all came to a head when the government decided that we should lock down in April. So from April to June, tourist arrivals practically fell to almost zero. So for the first 6 months of the year, about 43% drop in visitorship. About 2.7 million visitors came compared to the year before. And tourism receipts were down drastically by about 39% to US 2.9 billion in Q1. And due to the lockdown, shopping expenditure in Singapore was also halved to about US 482 million or so. The Singapore government has been working very hard to contain the spread of the virus while trying to reopen the economy as early as possible. The lockdown started to ease in June, and essential traveling to certain countries resumed in August. Next slide, please, Oliver. And the government has, you can see, set aside, well, to us, it's unprecedented sums of money to support the tourism industry, ranging from providing credits to encourage local tourism, to supporting wages of employees in the tourism and F&B sector. Due to second wave infections cropping up in several countries, we are only gradually opening the economy to prevent a second wave of infection. The government is expecting that the tourism sector might only recover at current pace of reopening, maybe in the year 2022 or 2023.
That's pretty worrying.
Yeah, so I mean, we still have to deal with all this inconvenience until then. In China, China started the lockdown in certain cities in January this year. So from April, China started to ease the lockdown and travel restrictions as in a gradual reopening of its economy. During the lockdown, the Hospitality Association reported that about 74% of the hotels and homestays were closed. And in the first 2 months of the year, tourism industry lost more than 10 billion in revenue. In Q1 this year, domestic tourism was down 68%. And it is projected that the decline would be about 20% for the whole year. Next slide, please. Well, the government side has lent a helping hand to support its tourism industry. It provided fundings to airlines that continue to operate or have resumed international flights during the virus outbreak. Tax incentives were also given, such as exemption of VAT and tax payable on income earned during the pandemic period, are also extended to support companies in the tourism industry. So as China came out earlier in the lockdown, and even though there's a smaller second wave infection happening now in certain cities, the local tourism is expected to recover by the end of the year. International arrivals are expected to recover maybe in the year 2021. Next slide, please. In Indonesia, COVID-19 has brought the number of foreign tourist arrivals down by more than 53% to 2.9 million visitors from January to May this year, compared to the same period last. About $5.8 billion of tourism revenue has evaporated in this period. About 4.8 billion was lost in the hotel and F&B industry, while about 1 billion was in the aviation and tour agency sector. Next slide, please, Oliver. And although it's reported that the infection has not peaked, in Indonesia, it has not peaked yet, so reported. The government is already planning to reopen its tourist attractions. Bali is planned to reopen later this month. And to support the tourist industry, the government is pumping millions of dollars into the aviation and travel industries. And if infection subsides in the third or fourth quarter of this year, the Indonesian authorities expect that the tourism industry might recover in next year, 2021. And that's it for me. Over to Kevin.
Thank you very much. Interestingly, that the countries are expecting to recover at different paces. I mean, China seems to be more optimistic internationally than others are, in particular Singapore, but let's cross fingers. Kevin, what's going on in terms of real estate? We mentioned it earlier, retail real estate, office real estate.
Yeah.
What are your observations?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and we always thought that the real estate unfolding is going to be a little bit more complicated than many other sectors because, so for example, as we talked about on the retail side, with the number of large retailers that are currently in Chapter 11, many of them are not only closing multiple locations, but you have several retailers that are just deciding not to reopen any of their stores. And it's gotten so bad that some of the larger owner-operators of shopping malls are now bidding on the assets of the retailers to keep them open and operating in their space. And it's a ripple effect, because if you have a large retailer in a large shopping mall and they go out of business and they close their doors, a lot of the smaller stores, obviously, that are in the same shopping mall don't have the same draw. And so it's just it's a domino effect. You're going to have a lot of empty space that's going to be coming, sitting out in the marketplace in the coming years. Conversely, on the residential side, it's take New York, for example. The New York residential marketplace is very soft right now because a lot of people are leaving the big cities and heading out to the more rural areas. So there's a big demand for residential housing in the suburbs, but the actual in the big cities, and I think the same thing is happening in London. People are fleeing the big city environments to get out where there's more space. It's also impacting, the ability of retailers that are in Chapter 11 to monetize their assets, to have going out of business sales where they can monetize all their inventory, because during COVID, everything was closed down. So what was typically an avenue to unload your excess inventory or all your inventory was closed down for a bit of time. So it put a lot of cases on hold until things could reopen and people could actually go out and physically, review and buy inventory, even at significant discounts. The commercial side we talked about, as far as office space for any professional services companies. I think Karsten was right on. All of our firms are looking originally to downsize our footprint to some degree because it's a big cost, but I think we realize even more so now that we're able to have our teams function virtually. It's efficient, it's effective, and I think we're looking for ways to balance that going forward, which will further decrease the demand for office space, you know, in the traditional way that you know we would do our work. You know, just some statistics. You know, the estimates right now are that upwards of 100 million square feet will go dark of office space over the course of the next 1 to 2 years, commercial. So, you know, with those closures and bankruptcy announcements, vacancies are projected, you know, to be at about 5.8%, which is a 100 basis point, you know, increase. With vacancies on the rise, the rent growth downshifted 80 basis points, you know, just again, supply and demand. From 2.4% in Q1 to 1.6% at the end of Q2, which marks the first time that rent growth has registered below 2% since 2013. So again, some interesting trending that's going to continue into 22.
I mean, one more aspect is also if office spaces are less used or closed down, that also, I guess it's specifically in the Americas, probably also in Asia, where there are often shopping malls around, that will bring down also quite a gun of restaurants, shopping malls where people spend their time during their lunch break or probably even after to pick up something. So there's a significant impact also far beyond this well, this significant change on real estate and the behavior of related people, right?
Just the way people work and live is going to be directly impacted by everything that's been going on. So Karsten alluded to that earlier. So yes, that and we're already seeing owners of real estate turning over the keys back to the banks and the lenders. So I think that you're going to continue to see that trend as well, which is that you just cannot meet the debt burden on some of these properties. And so it's cheaper to just give it back to the lender and walk away from it. And we've seen a lot of that with our, you know, restaurant clients. They've decided not to reopen. They've just handed the keys back over. And I think that you're gonna see that trend increasing certainly into the fourth quarter of this year and into next year on a much grander scale, as owner and operators of real estate are going to assess what makes sense. What, you know, how long is this going to go on for, and has it changed, you know, for the foreseeable future, how people use real estate? So again, I think this is going to be a very busy sector for us, and again, it's so tied into how businesses operate. But on the upside, if you've got manufacturers who need space, they're going to be able to get it cheaper than they could in the past because there's going to be such a glut of space on the market. So again, there's going to be opportunities there as well. It's not just all downside, you know, as we're thinking through beyond just the retailers, you know, what the effects are going to be.
Okay, some other aspects here, but I think you alluded to it, to 2,000 permanent closures by some retailers. So I think you've more or less covered these aspects. And before, anything you wish to add?
Retail is going to continue for quite some time. It's really now just seeing how other businesses, you know, that own, occupy real estate are going to change how they approach and what their needs are going to be. And I think this is going to play out over a longer period of time than just, you know, the next several months.
Okay, thank you very much to all our speakers. I'm not sure whether there are any questions. However, probably we now, well, I think thank the speakers for your time, and good evening to Asia and good morning to the US. And thanks for all attendees of this webinar. We will send a link around where you can obviously download and see the webinar again or share it with your fellows. There's going to be also a survey monkey just to get some input from you. We will now switch off the recording, and if there are some questions, then I suggest you just put them in the chat box, and then we can answer them. But otherwise, thanks to everybody, and most importantly, stay safe. And I'm quite positive there were a couple of points today which give some sort of hope. So let's cross fingers it's not getting that bad as probably some forecast. thanks everybody. Thanks to everyone, and have a nice day.